Hey everyone! Today we were breaking down the 1990 classic horror film, Child's Play 2. The story picked up right after the end of the first movie. In the first film, the soul of serial killer Charles Lee Ray had gotten trapped inside a good guy doll named Chucky. Chucky tried to transfer his soul into a little boy, Andy Barkley, but failed, and was seemingly destroyed in a fire. 2 years later, the Playpals toy company, the manufacturer of the good guy dolls, was in the middle of a PR nightmare. Their executives decided to recover the burnt remains of Chucky. They thought Andy's story was nonsense and wanted to rebuild the doll to prove there was nothing wrong with it, just to reassure their stockholders. However, there was an accident during the restoration process. A machine malfunctioned, and a massive power surge hit the doll. The reactivated Chucky zapped a technician with a high-voltage shock, killing him instantly. To cover up the truth, the company's CEO told his assistant Mattson to dispose of the doll. Meanwhile, Andy and his mother, who had barely survived, faced new problems. They were separately undergoing psychological treatment in the hospital. Without his mother's care, Andy stayed temporarily in a child services center. Not long after, he was adopted by the Simpsons. But Andy never really felt happy because he knew that no matter where he went, Chucky would find him. There was also a teenage foster daughter in the house named Kyle. Kyle looked very rebellious and had been in multiple foster homes before. Andy's foster parents had lovingly prepared a room for him, filled with toys. Andy tried to get the skateboard down from the closet, but a doll fell from above. Andy got scared and quickly took cover. But this doll wasn't Chucky. It was a good guy doll called Tommy. On a stormy night, Mattson threw Chucky into a car trunk, planning to take him away for disposal. On the way, Mattson stopped at a roadside shop to buy something. Chucky took the opportunity to disguise his voice as one of Andy's relatives and tricked a phone call to get Andy's new address. Unaware of everything, Mattson returned to the car and was threatened by Chucky with a gun. Mattson nearly cried with fear and was forced to drive the car to Andy's house under Chucky's demand. Actually, Chucky only held a toy gun, but those who saw Chucky's true face were doomed. In the end, Chucky suffocated him with a plastic bag, strangling him to death. Inside the house, the foster mother Joanne was telling Andy a bedtime story when Chucky silently slipped into the home amidst thunder and lightning. Chucky didn't act right away, but saw the Tommy doll in the living room and conceived a plan. Chucky used one of Joanne's prized porcelain dolls to smash Tommy to pieces, then buried Tommy's remains under the backyard swing. Thus, Chucky smoothly assumed the identity of Tommy. The next early morning, foster father Phil saw the broken porcelain doll and got very angry. He suspected it was Andy's doing and said Andy had too much of a psychological shadow over dolls. Andy told Phil it was Chucky's doing, but Phil didn't believe him. To check if the house's doll was safe, Andy summoned courage and went to inspect, and found the doll that contained batteries. Could he have been imagining things? To make Phil believe him, Andy picked up the doll in front of him and carried it back to his room. But that very night, terrible things followed one after another. Andy woke up from his sleep and found himself tied up, mouth stuffed with a sock, unable to speak. The culprit was Chucky. Chucky placed his hand on Andy's head and recited a curse. At the last moment, Kyle, who had sneaked out to play, returned to the room. Chucky instantly played dead. Kyle thought Andy was entertaining himself and gave it no more thought. The foster parents heard the noise and came to check. Andy told them Chucky was going to kill him. Phil was beyond speechless. To leave Andy with no excuse, he simply threw the doll into the basement. After Phil and Andy left, Chucky got crushed and started bleeding from his nose. Clearly his time was running out. If he didn't leave the body soon, he would be trapped in the doll forever. The next morning, Andy took the school bus as usual. But what he didn't expect was that Chucky had quietly crawled under the bus. While the kids were in gym class, Chucky sneaked into the classroom and found Andy's test paper. He had written profanities all over it. When class ended, Andy opened his locker and was startled by the doll inside. Miss Kettlewell saw the curse words on Andy's paper. She assumed Andy had done it himself and gave him detention. She locked Andy in the classroom and put the Chucky doll inside a supply closet. Andy peeked through the keyhole of the closet and came face to face with Chucky. Terrified, he climbed out the window and escaped. When detention time ended, Miss Kettlewell returned to the classroom. Hearing noises from the closet, she assumed Andy was hiding inside. Feeling annoyed, Miss Kettlewell didn't want to play hide and seek. As she searched through the supplies, the unthinkable happened. Chucky ambushed her. She tumbled out of the closet in horror. Then Chucky stepped out holding a long ruler. Moments later, Miss Kettlewell was beaten to death with that ruler. Andy made it home safely. He told Phil and Joanne that Chucky had attacked him at school, but they still didn't believe him. Phil brought Andy to the basement, saying the doll was still there and couldn't have gone to school. Andy had no way to prove himself and chose to stay silent. Realizing no one would protect him, Andy knew he had to rely on himself to survive. That night, he found an electric carving knife and went alone to the basement. Although brave, he was still just a kid. He searched around, but found nothing until Chucky suddenly jumped on him. In panic, Andy used the electric knife to fend him off temporarily. Just then, Phil heard the noise and came downstairs. Seeing Andy holding the knife, he was shocked and didn't give Andy a chance to explain. He only told him to drop the weapon. Phil stepped down the stairs, but Chucky, hiding in the dark, attacked him. He hooked Phil's leg with a sickle. Phil tumbled down the stairs, broke his neck, and died instantly. Joanne was heartbroken when she saw her husband's body. She decided to send Andy back to the children's center. Before leaving, Andy warned Kyle that Chucky was still there and told her not to let him catch her. After giving her statement to the police, Kyle went to the basement and found Chucky. For safety, she tossed him into the trash bin outside. That night, feeling down, Kyle sat on the backyard swing, but her foot hit something hard. She dug it out and saw a doll. If that was Tommy, then who was the one she had just thrown away? Kyle opened the trash bin, but the doll she had tossed in had vanished. While she was still puzzled, strange noises came from Joanne's bedroom. Kyle grabbed a knife and went to check. The sewing machine was running by itself, but Joanne sat motionless in front of it. When Kyle got closer, she saw a rope stuffed in Joanne's mouth and a bloody mark on her neck. Joanne had been murdered. Chucky, hiding under the sheets, suddenly jumped onto her back, trying to bite her throat. In panic, Kyle dropped her knife, but managed to grab a lamp base and hit Chucky away. The crisis, however, wasn't over. Before she could leave the room, Chucky appeared again and caught her. Under threat, Kyle was forced to drive him to the children's center to find Andy. On the way, her speeding caught a police officer's attention. While checking her license, the officer noticed the Chucky doll sitting in the passenger seat. He joked and tried talking to the doll, until he saw blood dripping from its nose. Kyle nervously made up an excuse and managed to fool the officer. Back on the road, Chucky kept urging her to go faster, so Kyle came up with an idea. She slammed on the gas pedal. The force sent Chucky, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, flying through the windshield. Kyle tried to run him over, but he narrowly escaped. Unfortunately, Chucky caught her again. At the children's center, an alarm went off, and everyone rushed downstairs. Andy was among the crowd. When Kyle appeared with Chucky, Andy froze in fear. Social worker Grace, unaware of the truth, pulled Andy along and questioned Kyle, asking if she had set off the alarm. Kyle shook her head and said the doll in her arms had done it. Grace didn't believe her, and in the next moment, Chucky came alive. He savagely stabbed Grace 3 times in the chest, and the woman collapses onto a copy machine, lifeless. Kyle grabbed Andy's hand and ran, but before they could escape, Chucky slammed the office door shut, trapping Andy inside. Soon, fire trucks arrived at the scene. Chucky took Andy hostage and fled inside a newspaper delivery truck. Seeing this, Kyle jumped into a car and chased after them. She managed to stop the truck, but Chucky had already escaped. The angry driver got out, yelling at her. As they argued, Chucky ran toward the toy factory. After clearing things up with the driver, Kyle chased him with all her strength, and just in time, she rolled into the factory as the shutter gate closed. Chucky knocked Andy unconscious and began a new round of the soul transfer ritual. As he chanted the ancient spell, dark clouds quickly gathered over the toy factory. Thunder and lightning filled the sky. When the ritual ended, Andy slowly woke up, but strangely, Chucky's nose started bleeding. He was devastated because the soul transfer had failed. He was now permanently merged with the doll's body and could never become human again. Chucky blamed Andy for everything and decided that Andy had to die for it. Just as he was about to strike, Kyle found them. She pushed over a pile of toy boxes, crushing Chucky beneath them. Andy seized the chance and ran for his life. After reuniting with Kyle, the two began looking for a way out. The factory was like a giant maze. Escaping wasn't easy. After wandering around, Kyle spotted a conveyor belt and planned to climb up through it. They were just one step away from freedom when Andy slipped and almost fell. Chucky was right below him. Luckily, Andy stopped himself in time. As Chucky climbed up after them, Andy scrambled upward with all his strength. Kyle grabbed his arm and pulled him to safety. Then she slammed down the metal gate, trapping Chucky's right hand underneath. He screamed in agony. Seeing Kyle and Andy escaping, Chucky shouted furiously, "I'll get you!" For revenge, he ripped off his own hand and brutally attached a knife in its place. To test his new weapon, Chucky slaughtered a factory worker on the spot. The relentless killer soon returned again. Kyle reacted quickly, grabbing a metal frame and smashing it at him. Chucky fell backward and was pinned onto the moving conveyor by nails. Andy hit the reverse switch, sending Chucky straight into the waste chamber. As the mechanical arms started processing, Chucky screamed in unbearable pain. When the hatch finally opened, he was nothing but a smoking pile of bloody pulp. Thinking it was finally over, Kyle and Andy prepared to leave. But in the next second, a worker's corpse fell and knocked Kyle out. To their horror, Chucky was still alive, though now missing his lower body. He sat on a small cart, rolling toward the helpless Andy. He cut the air hose and raised his knife for the final strike, but got stuck inside a machine. When hot molten plastic began dripping down, Chucky instantly realized he was doomed. Andy pulled the switch, and boiling liquid poured out of the pipe, completely covering Chucky. Meanwhile, Kyle lay unconscious on the conveyor belt, slowly moving toward the waste chamber. Andy quickly called out to her, waking her just in time. Kyle walked up to Chucky's melted body, smiled, and told Andy he was one clever kid. But before she could finish, Chucky came back to life once more. Kyle grabbed a nearby air hose and shoved it into Chucky's mouth. In seconds, his head inflated like a balloon. Pop! Chucky's head exploded under the pressure, scattering his body into pieces. This time, Chucky was truly gone. As the sun rose outside, Kyle and Andy held hands and walked out of the factory, toward an uncertain but hopeful future.